6 minutes. That's all it took for Jasmine Crockett to detonate a $250,000 bribery scandal that left Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas visibly shaken on live television. Cameras caught every gasp, every beat of sweat, as truth ripped through the nation's most powerful room. This wasn't just a political showdown. It was the moment America asked itself if even the highest judge can be bought. Is justice already dead? The camera goes live. Harsh lights flood the chamber. The seal of the United States looms above, and 100 eyes track every movement. This is the Supreme Court ethics hearing, and tonight it's the only thing America is watching. At the center table, Clarence Thomas sits rigid, his hands still but tense on a legal folder. His lawyer leans close, murmuring in short bursts, scanning the room like a man measuring escape routes. The mic isn't just a device. It's a switch, one that could end a decades-built career. The double doors open and the air in the room changes. Jasmine Crockett steps in her walk, deliberate the moment, pulling every camera lens toward her. In her hand is a sealed red envelope, the wax catching the light like a flare in a night sky. She doesn't look for the cameras. She knows they're already locked on her. Across the country, everything pauses. A nurse stops in the middle of a bustling hospital corridor to glance at a wall-mounted TV. A truck driver at a roadside diner leans over his coffee, eyes narrowing at the broadcast. In bars, kitchens, and crowded buses, phones buzz with the same alert. Live now, evidence expected. The message spreads, something is about to break. Inside the chamber, silence presses down like weight. Camera shutters click in staccato bursts. A boom mic hovers above the table, close enough to catch the sound of a heartbeat. The committee chair grips his gavel, poised but hesitant, as if he knows this hearing could spiral beyond his control. Jasmine reaches the witness table. She lays the envelope like an explosive charge. The wax seal bears a single embossed initial, the kind people use when they believe what's inside will never see daylight. Reflections of that deep red rectangle blink in teleprompters, wristwatches, and the wide eyes of the press. Thomas doesn't touch it. He doesn't even glance at it. But the slight tightening of his jaw is enough to tell the cameras he knows exactly what it means. A calm, unshaken voice comes through the live feed. They said no one could hold a Supreme Court justice accountable until today. Jasmine adjusts the microphone. The click echoes through the chamber. For a heartbeat, the country leans in together. And in that breathless pause, one question cuts through every living room. Diner and newsroom, what will break first to seal the silence, or Clarence Thomas himself? The camera lingers on the red envelope, but the broadcast cuts to a montage that every American has seen, yet never in this order. A luxury yacht slicing through turquoise waters, its polished decks reflecting a sky untouched by clouds. Clarence Thomas is there in the frame, smiling beside men whose names never appear on ballots, but whose money bends laws. The next shot, a sweeping aerial of a hilltop villa in the Caribbean, a glass of champagne catching the sunset on its balcony. Then a slow zoom into a private dining room, chandeliers dripping crystal, where Thomas sits at the head of a table, the clink of silverware barely masking the whisper of deals. News anchors narrate over the footage, voices pitched between outrage and disbelief. New questions tonight about undisclosed gifts. Ethics experts warn of unprecedented threats to judicial integrity. Social media scrolls by in a blur of hashtags, justice for sale, Thomas Bribes, resign now. The suspicion isn't born here. It's been simmering for years, but now the heat is impossible to ignore. We cut to a different room entirely. No marble, no chandeliers. It's Jasmine Crockett's congressional office at 2:07 a.m., lit only by the blue wash of computer screens and a single desk lamp. The camera glides past stacks of manila folders, each stamped confidential, past the wall plastered with photos, Thomas shaking hands with billionaires, Thomas boarding private jets, Thomas at ribbon cuttings for projects tied to campaign donors. Strings of red yarn stretch from one image to another, pinning together a web of connections, shell corporations, dark money passes, offshore accounts. There are sticky notes scrawled in thick marker: Bahamas, March 2018, Crow Holdings transfer, ruling announced 6 days later. In the corner, a corkboard lists names Jasmine has circled in red, some crossed out, some underlined twice. She leans over her desk, eyes locked on a spreadsheet mapping bank transactions, her pen tapping against a column that doesn't match the public record. On the desk lies an open file, a sworn statement from a whistleblower, the signature blurred for protection. Next to it, a USB drive marked in her handwriting tape. The scene holds for a moment the hum of an overworked air conditioner, the only sound. Jasmine exhales, pushes her chair back, and gathers the files into a stack, the same stack now sitting under her hand in the hearing room. Voiceover. This was never about partisanship. It was about whether the most powerful judge in the country could be bought and what that means for the rest of us. As the camera fades back to the live hearing, the envelope's red wax catches the light again, a silent promise that the real storm hasn't even started. The air in the chamber feels different now, heavier charged. Jasmine's hand rests on the stack of files she carried in the red envelope still in place, like a live grenade between her and Clarence Thomas. She leans toward the microphone, her voice crisp enough to slice through the hum of cameras. Justice Thomas, she begins, eyes locked on him. Did you accept gifts from Mr. Harlan Crow? A ripple moves through the room. Thomas adjusts his glasses, his lips parting for a moment before closing again. Congresswoman, he says slowly, I have always complied with the law. His tone is flat, rehearsed, the kind of answer meant to end questions, not invite them. Jasmine doesn't blink. She reaches into the stack and pulls out a glossy sheet of paper, holding it just high enough for the cameras to catch. It's a receipt, bold black numbers across the top, $500 chosen dollars. Beneath it, the description, Private Yacht Charter, Mediterranean, May 2019. She places it on the table, sliding it forward like a dealer laying down a card that changes the game. Jasmine taps the page once. 2 weeks before you sided with Mr. Crow's business interests. The chamber erupts in noise. Reporters fire off shots with rapid clicks, their lenses zooming in on the receipt, as if capturing it could freeze the moment in history. A few gasps escape from the public gallery, one so loud it carries over the microphones. The committee chair strikes his gavel twice, but it does nothing to calm the current running through the room. Thomas leans back, his jaw tight. He starts, but Jasmine is already speaking over him. The American people deserve to know, she says, her voice sharp but steady, and they deserve an answer that isn't buried in vague statements or legal loopholes. On the press bench, a young reporter scribbles furiously in a notebook, her pen smudging the words $500,000. Before ruling, no disclosure. On social media, clips of the exchange are already being posted, the receipt frozen midair in thumbnail after thumbnail. Thomas glances toward his lawyer, who is whispering something quickly, his hand covering his mouth. Jasmine doesn't give them the luxury of regrouping. Her hand moves toward the red envelope, her fingers brushing the wax seal, a small gesture, but enough to make the gallery lean forward. She looks around the room, letting the silence stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable. Then she says, calm but loaded, and if you think that's shocking, you haven't seen the real evidence yet. The moment Jasmine's hand lifts from the red envelope, the room holds its breath. She doesn't open it yet. Instead, she reaches for a remote lying on the table. With a single click, the hearing room's large projection screen flickers to life, casting a cold glow over Clarence Thomas's face. Justice Thomas, she begins, her voice carrying to the furthest corners of the chamber. Let's talk about 3 gifts the public has never heard about. The first image fills the screen. Thomas in khaki and a wide-brimmed hat standing beside a massive African antelope rifle in hand. A fully paid luxury hunting trip in Botswana. November 2020, 2 weeks before a case involving your host's mining company. Gasps ripple through the gallery. On the press benches, cameras click in bursts, freezing the image of the justice's broad grin next to the lifeless animal. Jasmine doesn't pause long enough for Thomas to speak. Click. The screen changes. Now it's a glossy real estate photo, white walls, oceanfront balcony, turquoise waves curling below. A beachfront apartment in the Bahamas. Jasmine says each word deliberate. Purchased in the name of a holding company linked to Mr. Crow. Records show you stayed here multiple times, including the week before your ruling in Crow versus Department of Commerce. Thomas shifts in his seat, eyes narrowing. His lawyer leans in, whispering fast, but Jasmine is already on to the third image. Click. A close-up shot of a diamond-studded watch gleaming under studio lights. The timestamp in the corner reads March 15, 2021. A Patek Philippe Grand Complications valued at over $200,000. gifted according to internal emails in gratitude for a favorable vote. The gallery stirs like a hive kicked open. Reporters are typing without looking up their screens, filling with words like undisclosed conflict of interest, judicial ethics crisis. On social media, live stream chats explode with comments, theories, and outrage. Jasmine steps away from the mic just long enough to let the images hang in the air. Each of these, she says, finally lines up with key Supreme Court decisions in your record. None of them disclosed, not to the public, not even to this body. Her eyes sweep across the committee, then back to Thomas. This is no coincidence, she says. It's a pattern. The screen freezes on the watch, its diamonds catching the light as the room waits to see if the man wearing it can escape the tightening snare. Thomas finally leans forward, his voice low but steady, forcing the room to go quiet. These, he says, gesturing slightly toward the screen, were personal gestures from friends. They had nothing to do with my rulings, nothing to do with the court's integrity. His tone is measured, almost paternal, as if trying to remind the country that he is above suspicion. Jasmine tilts her head slightly, the faintest trace of a smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. Friends, she repeats, letting the word hang in the air. Without breaking eye contact, she clicks the remote again. The screen comes alive with a new image, a private banquet room bathed in golden light. The table is long set with fine china bottles of rare wine glinting in the center. At the head sits Clarence Thomas, a glass raised mid-toast. Around him, 5 of the most powerful lobbyists in Washington, their names scrolling in a chyron beneath the image. The timestamp in the corner reads April 10th, 2021, 3 days before a landmark case that would net those lobbyists' clients billions. The gallery leans in as if distance could make the evidence softer. Thomas's smile in the photograph is broad, easy, the smile of a man confident his world is untouchable. But here, frozen on the giant screen, it looks almost like arrogance. This, Jasmine says, her voice sharpening, isn't a backyard barbecue with old college buddies. This is a closed-door dinner with paid lobbyists hours before your court heard arguments that directly impacted their clients' bottom lines. Thomas exhales through his nose, his fingers tightening on the armrests. His lawyer shifts beside him, eyes locked on the screen, lips pressed into a thin line. On the press bench, a photographer switches to a long lens, capturing the deepening crease between Thomas's brows. The overhead lights seem harsher now, casting sharper shadows across his face. Every twitch, every blink, every flicker of tension is being documented from a dozen angles. Jasmine steps back, giving the image on the screen room to breathe. So tell us again, she says quietly, how this was just a gift from a friend. The camera zooms in on Thomas, his expression still controlled, but the first cracks are there, faint and unmistakable. And in this room, even the smallest fracture can be the start of a collapse. Jasmine doesn't speak right away. Instead, she lifts a small black USB drive from her folder, the same one she had marked tape in thick black ink. She walks it over to a staffer at the evidence table, who slides it into the hearings display system. The projection screen goes black for a beat, and then the footage begins. It's shaky, handheld, clearly filmed from a hidden angle. The timestamp in the corner reads June 22nd, 2022. Clarence Thomas is seated at a long mahogany table, pen in hand, signing a document with deliberate strokes. His posture is relaxed, but the real focus is on what sits beside his right hand, a thick, cream-colored envelope, the kind that looks heavy even from a distance. The camera's focus shifts, catching the bulge of the envelope, the faint shadow of what could be stacks of cash or documents inside. In the background, a muffled voice says something indistinct, and Thomas gives a small nod before sliding the paper across the table. His fingers rest on the envelope for a split second, then pull away. The clip ends abruptly at 12 seconds. The room explodes in sound. Reporters leap to their feet, cameras firing in staccato bursts. The gallery's murmur swells into a wave of voices, some angry, some disbelieving. The committee chair slams the gavel 3-4 times, his voice rising. Order. This hearing will come to order, but the sound barely cuts through the chaos. Thomas shifts in his seat, his eyes fixed on the screen, as if replaying the moment in his head. His lawyer leans in, speaking quickly, the side of his mouth barely moving. Jasmine remains still, hands folded, watching the reaction ripple outward like shock waves from a detonation. A young journalist in the back whispers into her phone, "It's him. You can see the envelope. You can see it. Already tweets and headlines are forming. Leaked video shows Thomas with mystery envelope. The gavel slams again. Jasmine finally leans into her microphone, her tone calm, almost conversational, but the words land like steel on stone. "You're about to see," she says, scanning the room, "what Clarence Thomas never thought would go public." The projection screen stays black, but the promise of what comes next hangs in the air, like the scent before a storm, heavy, electric, and impossible to ignore. The lights in the hearing room dim without warning, casting long shadows across the panel. Murmurs ripple through the audience, the sudden change in atmosphere, making every neck crane toward the projection screen. On it, a new video feed flickers to life, the grainy image of a figure sitting in near darkness. Their face obscured the voice, altered by distortion and software. This Jasmine announces, her voice steady as a former senior accountant for a political fund with undisclosed ties to Justice Thomas. The figure shifts slightly gloved hands folded on a desk. A single desk lamp illuminates a few sheets of paper, and what looks like a ledger, the edges frayed from years of handling. The voice, though digitally masked, carries a tremor, not from uncertainty, but from the weight of what's about to be said. "I saw the transfers," the witness begins, each word deliberate. "I saw the meetings." The camera cuts to Thomas. His jaw is clenched, eyes locked on the screen, but a muscle in his cheek twitches. His lawyer scribbles something onto a legal pad, sliding it toward him, but Thomas doesn't look down. The witness continues. "Between 2017 and 2022, I tracked multiple payments, each one routed through layered shell companies, each one timed within days of high-profile rulings. On the screen, a hand lifts a ledger to the camera. The columns are dense with numbers, dates, and cryptic notations." Jasmine steps closer to the mic. "Were any of these transactions linked directly to Mr. Harlan Crow?" she asks. "Yes," the witness says without hesitation. "And others, including lobbyists whose names I am prepared to give to this committee in a closed session. But make no mistake, these were not friendly gifts. These weren't gifts. They were outcomes prepaid." A low hum of voices swells in the room. Cameras zoom in on Thomas, catching the subtle shift in his breathing, the way his fingers tap once against the table, and then stop. The witness leans forward just enough for the silhouette to fill the frame. "If I am here today," they say, "it is because I know the truth won't survive in the dark." The screen freezes on that image, faceless, nameless, but damning. And for the first time, Thomas glances away, as if searching for something in the room that isn't there. The lights brighten just enough for the next visual. Jasmine presses the remote, and the screen behind her explodes into color, a sprawling web of arrows, boxes, and red highlighted numbers. At the top, in bold letters, "Flow of funds, 2017-2022. A single red arrow points from Patriot Alliance PAC, a well-funded political advocacy group, down to a series of smaller boxes, labeled with vague names like North Bay Consulting LLC and East Point Holdings. Each one is marked in yellow, connected by thin lines like veins in a living organism. "Here," Jasmine says, stepping toward the diagram, "is how you launder influence." She traces the path with the laser pointer. Political contributions are funneled into the PAC. The PAC transfers millions into shell companies, each registered under obscure addresses, some no more than empty offices or mail drops. And from there, she clicks again. A flashing circle appears at the bottom of the chart. Clarence Thomas, personal account. The date stamps along the arrow are precise: June 25th, 2019, September 14th, 2020, April 1st, 2021. The room is silent except for the faint hum of the projector. These, Jasmine continues, are not random transactions. Every single one is within days of a Supreme Court ruling that directly benefited entities tied to these payments. Gasps ripple through the audience. A woman in the gallery covers her mouth, eyes wide. On the press bench, reporters are already snapping shots of the diagram, the laser pointer hovering like a sniper's sight over Thomas's name. She clicks again, and the screen zooms in on one entry, $150,000, April 3rd, 2021, via East Point Holdings. That payment, Jasmine says, was made 3 days before Justice Thomas authored the majority opinion in a case worth billions to one of Mr. Crow's largest partners. Thomas sits rigid, his hands clasped tightly on the table, but his knuckles are white. His lawyer's pen has stopped moving. "This isn't speculation," Jasmine says, her voice dropping. but cutting through the silence. It's documented, it's traceable, and it's here for the American people to see. She lets the screen linger, the arrows glowing like a roadmap to corruption. The chamber stays frozen, no coughs, no shuffling papers, as if no one dares to move while the picture of influence peddling hangs in plain sight. And in that stillness, the dots are no longer just connected. They're undeniable. Jasmine lets the flow chart fade from the screen, the room still reeling from its implications. She leans in toward her microphone, her voice low but electric. We have audio. The words hang in the air like a sudden drop in pressure before a storm. Across the table, Thomas stiffens. His lawyer immediately leans in, whispering sharply, one hand gripping the armrest as if to anchor them both. Madam Chair, the lawyer interjects, voice taut. We strongly object to the introduction of any recording not previously disclosed to the defense. Jasmine doesn't flinch. The American people have waited long enough, she says. This is their court. This is their justice system, and they deserve the truth. Thomas's lawyer stands now, the tension palpable. This is a violation of due process, he starts, but the committee chair's gavel cracks through the air like a gunshot. Enough, the chair says, voice carrying the weight of authority. Play the tape. A technician in the corner inserts a small unmarked USB drive into the system. The overhead speakers hiss faintly, the sound of a recording booting up. Jasmine folds her hands in front of her eyes, fixed on Thomas. The first voice is unmistakable, Thomas's deep measured cadence, speaking casually, but with an undercurrent of calculation. So, the decision will be in your favor, he says. There's the faint clink of glass in the background, as if the conversation is happening over a quiet drink. Then another voice, low, confident, unmistakably that of a known lobbyist, replies, and in return, as we discussed, the package will be delivered. No loose ends. A chair scrapes across a wooden floor in the recording, followed by the soft thud of something being placed on a table. The clip is only seconds long, but in those seconds, the atmosphere in the hearing room changes completely. Reporters exchange wide-eyed looks. The gallery murmurs in disbelief. Thomas's gaze hardens, but there's no mistaking the slight tremor in his hand as he adjusts his papers. Jasmine doesn't smile. She simply leans into her microphone again. The tape doesn't just confirm the bribe, she says, her voice like a blade sliding free of its sheath. It reveals the deal behind it. And just like that, the real battle begins. The room is silent for half a beat after the audio ends, as if the air itself has been sucked out. Then Jasmine gives a small nod to the technician. Rewind to the key line, she says. The speakers crackle and Thomas's voice fills the chamber, once more smooth, yet unmistakable. I'll make sure the decision goes your way. It's only 7 words, but they detonate like a bomb. The gallery erupts, gasps, shouts, and a wave of disbelief rolling through the crowd. Someone yells, "That's corruption," while another shouts, "Resign." The rapid-fire click of cameras becomes a deafening staccato, each flash freezing the moment into political history. On the press bench, reporters are already typing frantically their screens, filling with headlines in real time. In seconds, phones across the room buzz as Twitter explodes with a single hashtag, "Justice for Sale." Within minutes, the hashtag is trending nationwide. Screens in the gallery glow with feeds showing thousands of retweets, memes, and furious commentary. Thomas sits frozen, his lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. His lawyer leans toward him, murmuring something sharp and urgent, but Thomas's eyes remain locked on the table in front of him. The light from the projector catches the edge of his glasses, making it impossible to tell if he's blinking or holding back a glare. Jasmine doesn't rush. She lets the uproar ride its course, knowing the weight of silence that follows will be heavier than the noise. When the chair's gavel finally brings the room under control, she leans forward. "These are not my words," she says evenly. "These are the words of a sitting Supreme Court justice promising to shape the law to benefit a private interest. This isn't rumor. This isn't spin. In this story, it's proof." In the gallery, someone starts clapping a single pair of hands, deliberate and defiant, until others join in the sound, swelling into a slow, steady applause that cuts through the tension. The committee chair doesn't stop it. The moment is burned into the cameras, Jasmine upright and unflinching, Thomas staring straight ahead, and the country watching in real time as one of its most powerful figures is caught in the act. And somewhere in that electric silence, You can almost hear the question forming in millions of minds. If the highest judge is for sale, what's left to protect us? By the time the hearing adjourns for the day, the story has already overtaken every news cycle in America. Cable networks cut into regular programming with bold red banners, "Breaking Justice." Clarence Thomas, implicated in bribery scandal. Clips of the hearing play on an endless loop. Thomas's voice saying, "I'll make sure the decision goes your way." Jasmine's unflinching gaze, the explosive reaction from the gallery. Every network runs their own analysis, complete with timelines, graphics, and heated debates between legal experts. On the streets of New York, a camera crew stops passers-by. A middle-aged man in a Union jacket says bluntly, "If a justice can be bought, democracy is dead." A young woman in Washington, D.C., eyes glassy with anger, tells another reporter, "We've been told our whole lives that the court is sacred. Now we see it's just another rigged game." But not everyone agrees. Outside a courthouse in Texas, a group of Thomas supporters wave flags and hold signs reading "Witch Hunt" and "Hands off our justice." One woman in sunglasses tells a conservative news outlet, "This is just another smear campaign to take down a good man who stands for the Constitution." Social media becomes a digital battlefield. The hashtag "Justice for Sale" dominates Twitter, but counter hashtags like "Stand with Thomas" emerge, each side accusing the other of destroying the nation. Viral videos splice Jasmine's cross-examination with old footage of Thomas's swearing in, framing the scandal as either a tragic fall from grace or a long overdue reckoning. Late-night talk shows waste no time airing monologues that draw laughs and gasps in equal measure. One host deadpans, "Well, I guess we finally know the going rate for a Supreme Court decision, and it's less than a beachfront condo in the Bahamas." Polls conducted within hours show a dramatic shift. Public confidence in the Supreme Court plummets to a historic low. For the first time in decades, a majority of Americans say they believe at least one justice should be impeached. And in living rooms across the country, people who never thought twice about the court are leaning forward, watching the replay, hearing Thomas's voice again. The sentence is short, but the implications are endless. As one elderly woman in Chicago tells a reporter, her voice trembling, "If the law can be bought, what chance do the rest of us have?" The room is still buzzing from the public's reaction when Jasmine stands again, a fresh stack of documents in her hands. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't need to. The quiet confidence in her tone pulls every eye back to her. "Members of the committee," she begins, "we've been talking about bribes and influence. But what I'm about to show you connects this corruption to something far more dangerous, an attack on the very right to vote for millions of Americans." She clicks the remote and a new slide flashes onto the screen, a campaign finance ledger with one name highlighted in deep red, the same donor tied to Clarence Thomas's suspicious payments. This, Jasmine says, pointing with her laser, is the same individual who bankrolled a nationwide push to restrict voting rights in minority communities. The gallery stiffens. She clicks again. The screen now shows a map of the United States with states highlighted in crimson, where these restrictive laws passed in the last 5 years. Next to each state is a timestamp paired with a Supreme Court decision number. In every single one of these cases, she says, her voice tightening, Justice Clarence Thomas voted in favor of upholding these restrictions. Gasps ripple through the audience. A man in the back shakes his head in disbelief, muttering, "It's all connected." Jasmine steps closer to the committee bench. "We are not just talking about luxury trips and hidden bank transfers. We are talking about the deliberate dismantling of voting access, targeting the very communities this nation has historically tried to silence. And those votes," she pauses, letting the weight settle, "were paid for." Thomas shifts in his seat, the tension visible in the set of his jaw. His lawyer shuffles papers, trying to avoid the cameras now zooming in for close-ups. In the gallery, someone whispers, "This isn't just corruption. This is systemic sabotage." Jasmine lets the map linger on the screen for a moment longer, the red highlighted states burning into the audience's minds. Then she delivers her final line, each word sharp and deliberate. "If the audio shook you," she says, locking eyes with the cameras, "the money trail will break you." Silence so deep even the lights hum. Everyone knows the next revelation could change everything. The air in the hearing room feels heavier now, every breath measured, every eye locked on Jasmine as she opens a slim black binder. She slides a single sheet from a protective sleeve and holds it up for the cameras. This, she says, is a certified bank statement obtained through subpoena. Her tone is calm, but the undertone is lethal. The document appears on the overhead screen, clean, white paper, bold, black numbers, no ambiguity. In the center of the page, highlighted in yellow, is the entry $250,000 transfer from East Point Holdings, LLC, 7 days before Supreme Court decision 21-1047. The date alone draws an audible reaction from the gallery. Someone whispers, "That's right before the ruling," and another voice answers, "It's not a coincidence." Jasmine steps forward, the document still projected behind her. East Point Holdings, she explains, is not just any company. It is directly tied to the same donor. We've identified the donor behind luxury trips, behind voting rights rollbacks, and now behind this payment. The room seems to tighten as the weight of the connection sinks in. Thomas sits motionless, but the tendons in his neck are taut. His hands clasped so tightly his knuckles have gone pale. Outside, the news spreads like wildfire. In a cramped press corner of the room, reporters are already live streaming to millions. One correspondent stares directly into their camera and says, "This could be the end for Clarence Thomas. A direct payment traced to a donor with clear stakes in a pending case. It's the kind of evidence you can't explain away." On Twitter, the hashtag Justice for Sale spikes again, joined by a new one, 250K before the vote. Screens in the audience glow as messages pour in from across the country. Jasmine doesn't move to the next slide yet. She lets the silence stretch, forcing everyone in the room and everyone watching at home to sit with the fact that the money trail has finally landed in plain sight. "This isn't about speculation," she says at last. "This is about proof, a payment, a date, a decision, and a justice who chose power over principle." The cameras catch her eyes narrowing, as if she's just loaded the final round. Everyone knows the next words could be the shot that ends a career. For nearly a full minute after Jasmine's final words, Clarence Thomas doesn't move. The entire room is frozen, the sound of camera shutters the only noise slicing through the tension. Then, without warning, he shoves back his chair, the metal legs screeching across the floor. This hearing, he roars, voice cracking, but still heavy with rage, is disgraceful. An outright attack on the integrity of this court. His fist slams onto the table, rattling the water glasses. The gallery explodes into chaos, some shouting in agreement, others booing, their voices clashing in a deafening wall of sound. Photographers surge forward, their flashes strobing across Thomas's face, catching every flicker of fury and strain. The committee chair hammers the gavel, but it's useless. The air is electric, uncontainable. Jasmine doesn't flinch. She stays seated, her gaze locked on him, as if daring him to finish what he started. Her calm in the face of his eruption only fuels the spectacle, and the cameras zoom in desperate to capture the contrast, her stillness against his unraveling. Thomas's lawyer tugs at his sleeve, murmuring urgently, but Thomas jerks away. His eyes sweep the room, the reporters, the public, the cameras, as though realizing in real time that every second of this meltdown will play on screens across America by nightfall. Then, as quickly as the rage boiled over, it collapses into something else. His shoulders sag, his mouth tightens, and in a moment that stuns even his supporters, he sinks back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. The noise in the gallery shifts from outrage to disbelief. Some of his allies avert their eyes. Others lift their phones, live streaming the scene. Finally, Thomas pushes himself up again, slower this time, avoiding eye contact with anyone. He gathers his papers with shaking hands but leaves them behind as if they've become too heavy to carry. And without waiting for permission from the chair, Clarence Thomas turns and walks out, his security detail scrambling to clear a path. The cameras follow him all the way to the door, their frames shaking from the crush of bodies. In that instant, the image is burned into history, not just of a justice leaving a hearing, but of a man whose power may have just collapsed under the weight of his own secrets. The hearing room is still humming with aftershocks from Clarence Thomas's exit. Reporters murmur into their microphones, cameras swivel back toward the witness table, and all eyes land on Jasmine Crockett. She doesn't shuffle papers or glance at notes. She simply leans into the microphone, her gaze fixed straight ahead. Her eyes find the main broadcast camera, and for a moment it feels as though she's speaking directly to every living room, every phone screen, every American watching. Justice bought, she says slowly, each word landing like a hammer strike as justice denied. The phrase echoes in the chamber, lingering in the heavy air. Some in the audience nod, others sit frozen, absorbing the blunt finality of her statement. Jasmine's voice hardens as she continues. We cannot have a court that serves the highest bidder. We cannot allow the law to be shaped by money instead of principle. She gestures toward the now empty chair where Thomas sat. Today was about one man, but tomorrow, it must be about the system. That's why I'm calling for two things: full transparency for all judicial financial disclosures and term limits for Supreme Court justices. No one should hold unchecked power for life. The committee chair leans back, arms folded, allowing her the floor. The cameras move in closer, capturing the steadiness in her expression, not triumphant, not smug, but resolute. Some will say this is political, she says, her voice lowering to a razor's edge. But this isn't about party. This is about the promise that every American, no matter their wealth, their race, their zip code, can walk into a courtroom and know the scales of justice aren't tipped before they even speak. She lets the silence hang for a beat, then leans in once more. Her final words are aimed directly at the viewer, her tone shifting from command to challenge. Bought justice, denied justice. So what happens next is up to you. The feed cuts on her face, steady, unblinking, as if daring the nation to decide which side of history it will stand on. When the truth is hidden, darkness overtakes justice. True power doesn't lie in status or authority, but in the courage to stand on the side of what's right, even if it means standing alone. Each of us has a responsibility to protect transparency and fairness, because silence only feeds wrongdoing. If tomorrow you witnessed an injustice, would you turn away or stand up to change it? If this story hits you, don't just scroll. Like it, share it with someone who still believes in justice, and subscribe to Hill Insights, where silence turns to courage and every voice matters. Turn on the bell, because the next story is already unfolding and it might just change you. What moment stayed with you? Drop it in the comments. Let's carry this truth forward together. This is inspired by real battles and real bravery, not to divide, but to awaken. Truth doesn't end here. It waits for someone brave enough to press play.